The palace was not meant to sleep that night. Long after the gilded gates of Buckingham were shut to the public, a string of black motorcars slipped silently into the courtyard, their headlamps cutting pale arcs across the wet cobblestones. Inside the green drawing room, where the portraits of monarchs past seemed to watch with knowing eyes, King Charles III sat hunched over a desk strewn with parchment, a heavy red folder at its center. The hour was late, but urgency had stripped the night of rest. Every clock seemed louder than usual, every shadow sharper. What the nation would wake to in a few hours' time would be no ordinary royal bulletin. It would be a proclamation that would upend centuries of expectation, a decision drawn from the very marrow of the king's conscience. Charles, whose reign had only just begun to steady itself after the long shadow of Queen Elizabeth II, had resolved to step down from the daily burdens of kingship, not into abdication, but into something almost as unprecedented, the appointment of a regent outside the traditional line. And not just any regent. Catherine, Princess of Wales. His daughter-in-law. The woman the British press had long framed as the embodiment of modern grace, quiet strength, and an unyielding sense of duty. To some, the choice would be breathtaking, to others, a calculated necessity. In the king's own words, which would soon be read aloud by a trembling courtier, it was a matter of the realm's stability and the crown's endurance. The seeds of this night had been sown months earlier. In February of the previous year, Charles had announced to the public that he was undergoing treatment for cancer. Optimism had followed a summer in which he was seen laughing with a cancer survivor, speaking warmly of his progress. But privately, the truth was more fragile. By March, a sudden hospitalization for complications had rattled the entire court. Insiders whispered that the king's recovery was no longer a straight path upward, but a steep climb with unforeseen drops. Fatigue gripped him in the middle of state briefings. Private audiences were rescheduled at the last minute. Those closest to him began to ask the question he had been avoiding: could the business of the crown wait for a man's health to recover? The answer came tonight. In a small semicircle around the king, key figures listened in weighted silence. The Lord Chamberlain, his face drawn, held the Regency Act in one hand, a sheaf of notes in the other. The king's private secretary kept glancing toward the door, as though half expecting an interruption. Absent, conspicuously, were two figures: Queen Camilla, said to be in her private apartments nursing a migraine, and Prince William, whose location the palace declined to confirm. It was a decision, sources said, Charles had chosen to announce before even his heir had been fully briefed. By law, the Regency Acts name the heir apparent as regent when the sovereign becomes incapacitated. But the Acts also contain obscure provisions for special circumstances, clauses that had never before been tested in modern Britain. Tonight, those clauses would find their first use. Parliament would be asked, no, compelled, to ratify a regency in Catherine's name. It was a choice Charles defended with the conviction of a man who believed the monarchy could not simply survive, but adapt. The reasoning, in part, was deeply personal. Catherine had endured her own public trials, most notably a serious abdominal surgery in 2024, after which she returned to public life with an almost defiant composure. Her work in mental health advocacy and early childhood development had built her a bridge to the people, one even the king privately admitted was sturdier than his own. She understands the soul of this nation, he was overheard telling a confidant weeks ago. Not just its history. Yet if the public was to see only a graceful transition, behind closed doors there was tension enough to crack marble. Some senior courtiers feared the optics of bypassing William, however temporarily. Others argued that Catherine, with her popularity, could unite a fractious public at a time when the crown's moral authority needed bolstering. One whispered that this was, in fact, the king's quiet test, to see how Catherine wielded the scepter before William took it for good. Shortly after midnight, the king's statement was read to a select gathering of aides, advisers, and a handful of press representatives bound by embargo. It is with a heavy heart that I must prioritize my health and the well-being of the realm, it began. After careful consultation with my family and advisers, I have decided to step aside temporarily, entrusting the regency to Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose grace, dedication, and vision have been a beacon for our nation. The words were deliberate, the tone final. In the corner, a court photographer captured the moment the king placed his signet ring beside the parchment, a signal the document was ready to be sealed. Outside, the rain-slicked streets of London reflected the lamplight in trembling pools. Somewhere beyond those walls, Catherine was being ushered into a waiting car, her face unreadable in the dark. In just a few hours, Britain would wake to a new reality, its sovereign still living, but the sceptre passing, however temporarily, into the hands of its future queen. This was no abdication. It was a calculated surrender of daily power, a bridge between illness and stability. But in the court of public opinion, the distinction might matter little. All that would matter, come dawn, was the image of Catherine at the helm, and the quiet, looming question of whether Charles would ever truly take it back. By dawn, the air outside Buckingham Palace was thick with the hum of camera crews and the murmur of onlookers pressed against the black railings. News anchors spoke in urgent, measured tones, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Inside, the palace corridors moved with a choreography known only to those who served the crown, footmen carrying silver trays stacked with correspondence, uniformed guards shifting posts, aides murmuring into discreet earpieces. At the center of it all, Catherine stood in the blue drawing room, the first light of day spilling across the polished parquet floor. She wore a tailored navy dress, her hair swept back, a string of pearls at her collar. In her hands, she held the sealed Regency document, its crimson wax unbroken, the king's signet pressed into its surface. This was not just a formality, it was the legal transfer of royal authority, and it carried the weight of every monarch who had ever wielded it. She had been awake most of the night. The call from the king's private secretary had come just before midnight, summoning her from Kensington to the palace. In the car, she had been briefed on the urgency of the matter, the king's deteriorating condition after a night of acute fatigue and dizziness. By the time she arrived, the decision had been made. What remained now was to embody it. Not far from her, the palace press office was drafting the public statement. Every word would be combed for implication. Was this a temporary measure or the beginning of a longer transition? Why Catherine and not William? Would the king return, or had the nation just witnessed the first quiet step toward abdication? The official answer was deliberately vague, but within these walls, everyone knew the weight of the moment. In the Privy Council chamber, preparations were underway for an emergency session. The ceremonial table, with its carved lion heads and green leather surface, had been cleared for documents. Parliament was already in motion, senior ministers were arriving at Westminster for what the Speaker described as urgent constitutional business. A vote to ratify the Regency could come within hours, giving Catherine the full powers of the Crown, the authority to sign legislation, summon and dismiss ministers, and represent the United Kingdom abroad. Yet behind the procedural formality, whispers threaded through the palace. One senior aide confided that Prince William had been informed of the decision only moments before the statement went public. Another claimed that Camilla had protested the choice of regent, citing the break from tradition and the optics of sidelining the heir apparent. Neither comment would ever appear in an official record, but in the quiet corners of court life, they grew like ivy. In the king's private apartments, the atmosphere was subdued. Charles rested in a high-backed chair by the window, a tartan blanket over his knees, watching the gardens below. His physicians came and went with quiet efficiency, their expressions carefully neutral. On a side table sat a stack of newspapers, their front pages dominated by a single image, Catherine stepping out of a darkened car, her face set in calm determination. The king did not comment, but those who knew him recognized the faintest trace of relief in his eyes. Meanwhile, the world beyond Britain's shores was taking notice. Messages of support poured in from Commonwealth realms. The Canadian Prime Minister praised Catherine's steadfast leadership, while New Zealand's Governor-General spoke of a seamless and dignified transition. In Spain, a royal household spokesman expressed confidence in her ability to maintain the unity and dignity of the crown. Even across the Atlantic, the White House issued a statement acknowledging the historic nature of this moment. By midday, Catherine was ready to make her first public appearance as regent. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, she addressed a select assembly of senior ministers, military leaders, and representatives of the church. Her voice was steady, clear. I accept this responsibility with deep humility, mindful of the trust placed in me, and with unwavering commitment to serve the people of this nation. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing the moment for history. What she did not say, and perhaps could not, was that this regency was as much a test as it was an appointment. Every decision, every public engagement would be measured against the standard of a reigning monarch. Her success could cement her role as the future queen, any misstep could invite questions about the monarchy's stability. Late in the afternoon, as the formalities wound down, Catherine walked alone through the picture gallery. The portraits of past sovereigns lined the walls, their gazes fixed and unblinking. Somewhere in that unbroken chain of history, she was now a living link. She paused before a painting of Queen Mary, the last woman to serve in a regency role, and wondered, not for the first time, how history would remember her own tenure. Outside, the crowds remained, braving the chill for a glimpse of the woman now steering the crown through uncertain waters. They did not see the moments of private hesitation, the weight of a nation settling on her shoulders. They saw only the poise, the composure, the quiet certainty. And perhaps that was enough, for now. As dusk fell, the palace released a final statement for the day. King Charles III was resting comfortably, and the regent, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had assumed her duties effective immediately. The flag above Buckingham fluttered in the evening breeze, and the city's lights began to twinkle in the distance. London had seen many changes of power in its long history, but few as quiet, as deliberate, or as filled with unspoken consequence as this one. Whether this regency would last weeks, months, or forever was a question no one could yet answer. But in the stillness of that night, one truth was undeniable: the crown had a new hand upon it, and the nation's future was, at least for now, in Catherine's keeping.